Hello everyone, and welcome back to a new video in our introduction to the finite element method, in which we are going to be covering a first course in the finite element method. It's a book by Daryl and Logan, and today we're going to be starting talking about chapter 10. Now this is an introductory video, but it's important because I kind of want to approach the topic of isoparametric formulation differently. The book of Daryl and Logan starts with a line element, although I do not see the benefit of using the isoparametric formulation for linear elements. So I'll be starting with the planar elements directly. So today we're going to discuss some of the most important principles that are necessary to understand isoparametric formulation. So with that being said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Alright, so before we start talking about the topic today, I want to mention that in case you are new to the channel, this is part of a video series where I discuss a first course in the finite element method by Daryl L. Logan. And you can see the video list on the top right. Alright, so in real finite element measures, basically what we do in Autolus Robot, check out that playlist on the top right again. We have finite element measures, and those are quads and sometimes triangles that are usually non-rectangular and non-square and do not have the same aspect ratio or size. I mean, this is quite obviously a finite element mesh. You can see that, well, there are different versions of those quads. Each one of them has a different aspect ratio, different sizes, and so on. And if you have seen my previous lectures on the LST element, or the quad element, CST being an exception, you can see that the stiffness matrix formulation is geometry dependent, and since it's geometrically dependent, this means that your design code, if you want to make a finite element method code, it would be geometrically dependent, and it's very hard to debug and work with. So we thought about something else, which is basically the isoparametric formulation, and I want to talk about it in today's video. So once again, to reiterate, you have different mesh elements. As you can see, each of them has a different type or different shape, which means that if you want to use geometry-dependent formulations, each one would have different values and different ways, and each one would be its own problem. So in that case, what is the idea of the isoparametric formulation? Now I'm going to use simplified language, and I will be talking about the finite element jargon in the next video, or even sometimes in this video. But to simplify, we try to project the real shape, which is on the right side, into a perfect shape, and use the perfect shape to try to find a stiffness matrix. So there is like a projection and back projection happening. We're going to project the real shape onto a perfect shape, try to find or formulate the stuff for the perfect shape, and then back project to the real shape. So there's some projection going to happen, and it might be odd for now, but I will explain this in the next video how exactly this happens. There is Jacobian matrices and S and T coordinates and so on. It's pretty much a complicated thing, but I want to dissect it one by one because I don't want to dive headfirst into that. So let's understand at least how projection and back projection work. The perfect shape in the isoparametric formulation usually has a size of +1 in the S-axis and -1 in the S-axis, +1 in the T-axis, and -1 in the T-axis. I know if you are a finite element student and you have read this before, you might know them as eta and I think xi or something, or xi and eta. But Daryl and Logan's book uses S and T for coordinates. Now, before I start with any of this jargon, let me explain to you how this projection works. So if I put a point on the real shape, so you see this point is in the centroid of the real shape. For all those, you can see the points being here. The point on the real shape has different coordinates based on the shape. I mean, if you put the xy coordinate axis here, this is the origin and x and y, you would, and for each one you have an origin like this, x and y. If you put for each shape the origin on the bottom left, the coordinate of the centroid is different for each shape because each shape has a different, well, shape. And that's the reason why the centroid is there, but in different locations in the absolute sense. However, if you back project it on the perfect shape, well, it's a centroid, so the representation of the centroid of the real shape is going to be one point on the perfect shape, regardless of what the shape is. The centroid is one shape. I mean, look at this point, for example. This point here is in the bottom right corner for each one of those shapes. it will also be situated in the bottom right corner for the perfect shape. For example, this one is somewhat middle-ish top right, so you can see it's middle-ish top right everywhere. And yeah, this is how projection works. And even if you have a line, look at this line now, it is being projected, as you can see, between the real shape and the perfect shape. Of course, you can see that the real shape is somehow stretching and shearing the shape with respect to the perfect shape, but that's what I mean by projection. And it is this projection that I will be using. Now, how do we do this? That's what I want to be talking about in this video, at least the principles of that. But it's very important to understand what the isoparametric formulation is and what the perfect shape, which we will call the natural shape in the natural coordinate system, means. It means simply that I have a unified shape of I think 2 units by 2 units, and anything on the real shape can be projected on the perfect shape and vice versa. Now, since you can project that, you need equations to do this. You need equations to project those points between the perfect shape and the real shape. I'm still using perfect shape and real shape as simplified language. Later, I will be using the finite element jargon language, but for now, I want to keep it as simple as possible. Because as I usually say, I don't care if I don't sound smart. What my point is that I want you to be smart. The real thing is actually called natural coordinate system versus real coordinate system. So the real coordinate system is in x and y, and of course the degree of freedom in x is called u, the displacement in x is called u, and the displacement in y is called v. You can see that this is the perfect shape or the natural coordinate system, and this is the real shape in the coordinate system of x and y. I wanted to pause the video and just try to sink this in, because you can see that this shape has edges, and those edges, for example, this red edge represents this red edge, and the bottom edge represents the bottom edge. For example, this dashed line that I'm just dashing here represents this dashed line, and I want you to sink this in. You need to pause the video, maybe go back here and double check how the projection happened. This might help you to understand exactly how we project from the actual shape to the perfect shape. Now, this is a principle. We need to basically check out equations for that. So let's try to understand what is happening here. You see, to project from the real shape back to the perfect shape and vice versa, you need to understand how you can transform the real shape into the perfect shape, and vice versa. So what are the processes that are needed to transform the perfect shape into the real shape? And of course, the inverse of those processes are going to be the vice versa. So if you notice, and I actually tried to simplify it here, the natural coordinate system, which is the perfect rectangle here, you could scale it in S to create a rectangle like this. You could scale it in T to create a somewhat standing rectangle, but unfortunately I cut this here. My teaching assistant messed up. So you could scale it in S, which corresponds to the increase in x. You could scale it in T, and you could shear it or scale it in ST. This is called shearing, where you just move 2 sides respect to each other, not parallel to each other. And of course, a combination of this does give you the transformation. So remember, to transform a natural coordinate system into a real coordinate system, you need scaling in in S, scaling in T, scaling in ST, or the diagonal, some people call it shearing, and a constant shifting if you want to shift the coordinate system some values. So what is the equation that allows me to scale S, scale T, scale ST, and shift? Well, let's look at this. This is an equation for x. So what you see here, and this is very important to internalize, and that's why I need you sometimes to pause the video and just try to let it sink in. X is the position of a certain point on the shape, this position. Let's say this red dot has a position of x and y. Now, this red dot's position can be found if we know the position of the red dot on the real shape and the natural shape. if this is an input, if this is your input, and you know the scaling and shearing and whatever that happened, then you can find the x as an output from this equation. This equation says A1 plus A2S plus A3T plus A4ST equals x. So this equation tells you if you give me the S and T coordinates, which means the position on the perfect shape, then I can give you back the position in the real shape. This is the mapping that was happening. This equation is what controlled those dots appearing. As a matter of fact, I tried to simplify it, but what really happens is this gets done first on the perfect shape and then translated into the real shape as per this equation, because this equation connects the perfect shape with the real shape. The vice versa of it would be the inverse. So you can look at those constants and you can see that A2 scales in S because it multiplies by S. A3 scales in T, A4 scales in ST, and A1 is a constant for shifting in X. Similarly, for the X, you could derive for the Y, where you have A5, A6, A7, and A8. Those two equations connect any position on the perfect shape onto its counterpart in the real shape. For example, if I put an O here, this would appear somewhat here-ish, somewhat here. So this is what I mean by projection. Now, do those equations sound familiar? Yes, those are very familiar. Those are displacement fields for U and V. If you remember, those are basically what we use for U, which equals A1, A2x, A3y, A4xy from the Pascal triangle that I explained, I think, in the LST. I'm gonna put a link on top right, but I'm not sure if it was in the LST or not, so double check that. And you can see something very strange. You see that we are using the same equation to talk about the shape and the displacement. You see, the word iso means equal or equivalent, and parametric means, well, parameters. So it's called isoparametric because it seems, and this is an outtake from Daryl and Logan's book, the term isoparametric is derived from the use of the same shape functions to define the element shape as are used to define the displacement. So this x defines the element shape. And the displacements u were actually connected in a very similar equation, albeit maybe they were different. Instead of s, you had x. Instead of t, you had y. And that's why it's called isoparametric formulation. This has a massive, massive advantage, and I will be talking about the advantage of this in the future. Now, going on, well, u can be also connected to the natural coordinates. So, I mean, you could superimpose and say the u that is on node 4 is actually the u on this node, and the v, for example, on this node is actually the v on this node. But you would think, wait, isn't there a scaling happening here? Yes, and I will be talking about this in the Jacobian matrix soon. For now, let's just sink it in and say that, hey, I am going to project and back project from a perfect shape into a real shape, and use the perfect shape because you see the perfect shape has a known shape, and I can use this known shape to try to derive a way of finding the stiffness which is unified. And then in the back projection, of course, I would take into consideration the shape variations. So you see, you take the shape out of the formulation inside the element, but take it into consideration in the projection, back projection process. That's basically what we're trying to say. So I will be talking about this in the next videos. So this is the last thing I want to mention. So what we learned so far is that we have a perfect shape, which is called the shape of the natural coordinates. We have the real shape, which is on the real coordinates. We have a way to connect the x of the real with the s and t of the perfect, and the displacements of the real into the displacements of the perfect. I'll be talking about this in the future. Now, questions to be answered next time is, it seems that A1 is mentioned in X and U. You can see A1 is being mentioned in both. So are they equal? And how can we calculate them? I'm not going to give spoilers. I will leave it for the future. Also, I still have not answered the question of how can I project and back project the stiffnesses. Yes, I know how to project and back project the coordinates, but this is a long way to be walked until I reach the stiffness. I haven't talked about this today because I want you to try let it sink in, because in the future I will just start from where I stopped here. So this is what we're going to be talking about in the next video, so I recommend you read chapter 10 from the book if you want. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to talk about today. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Also, I am a little bit sorry that sometimes I am a little bit off my release schedule. Reason being that I am of course working at university and I have a full-time job, so I try my best. With that being said, and before I finish, I want to give a huge isoparametric sized shout out to our dear channel members on the contributor level and the helper level, whose names are going to be shown on the screen. I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart, as the support of the channel is priceless to me and enables me to provide you with the videos hopefully on time and with a certain quality I try to achieve, and for that I am forever thankful. As per usual, I hope that you enjoyed the video and that you found it beneficial. Of course, if you have enjoyed the video, then please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting and so on, as a sacrifice to the YouTube algorithm, especially subscribing, because it helps increase the reach of my channel. As per usual, this is the Civil Engineering Essentials channel, and we'll catch you in the next video. Bye bye.